My own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this can pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass.
வணக்கம், நான் பெருமாள் முருகன். தமிழ்நாட்டில் உள்ள
வணக்கம், I am Perumal Murugan. I live in Tamil Nadu in a town called Namakkal. I live with my wife, son and daughter. I am a Tamil language writer. In 2015, there was some controversy surrounding my book. So I made a public announcement saying, Perumal Murugan, the writer, is dead.
இறந்து விட்டான் என்று பொதுவெளியில் நான் அறிவிப்பு செய்தேன்.
What right does she have to come here and poke her nose into our history?
So I have received hate mail from the Hindu right wing, broadly conceived, since late 2015. It's not consistent, it's not always every single day, but it's definitely every week. And at times, it's every 5 minutes. I think it shows the Hindutva crowd for what they are, which is a bunch of belligerent, anti-intellectual jerks who just want to interrupt and cause chaos rather than have any serious discussion.
Yeah, there was absolutely a connection between the revocation of my OCI and the Time magazine article. The Time magazine article appeared in May. The Prime Minister, who knew very well that I'd grown up in India with an Indian mother, was completely implicated in Indian intellectual life, comes forward and says, this guy is a Pakistani. That set the trolls completely against me. All the sort of news organizations that were allied with the BJP started to attack me. By August, I'd received a letter threatening to take away my OCI. My OCI was cancelled by the Home Ministry on Twitter.
There was one man named Batra. He and a group of his colleagues brought a lawsuit against the book under a law in India that was actually devised, ironically, by the British in the early 20th century to protect Muslims from being attacked by Hindus. And it was a law that made it a criminal offense to offend the religious sensibilities of someone in India. And anything can offend anyone. You don't have to be intentionally offensive.
The process of going through the interviews with the rapists was deeply, profoundly distressing and depressing. But nothing was as vile. Having delivered the film and then finding it was banned, nothing depressed me as much as that.
I was born into Dalit family known as untouchable community known as Madigas, and our traditional occupation is drumming and sewing sandals. There was no ideological way to contest me or counter my argument, because that's what the privileged always feel. When their privilege is threatened, they feel that they are losing everything. So therefore, I am a threat to privilege, I am a threat to injustice, I am a threat to any form of discrimination.
ಇದು ಒಂದು ಧರ್ಮ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ, ಈ ಧರ್ಮನ ಸಂರಕ್ಷಿಸಬೇಕಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಧರ್ಮ ನಮಗಿರೋದು ಸಂವಿಧಾನ, ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಧರ್ಮ.
But she was murdered because of her speech. I mean, this is fundamentally a free speech issue. But she's also being murdered in the name of the Hindutva vision of Hinduism.
Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Ma'idah, chapter number 5, verse number 33, as to anyone who wages a war against Allah and His Messenger, that you can either execute him, you can crucify him, chop off opposite limbs, or take him out of the country. And this law is not only in the Quran, it is even in the Bible.
The author, Salman Rushdie, has been attacked on stage as he was about to give a lecture. He appears to have been stabbed in the neck.
It was ironic that the platform where he was stabbed, he was going to talk about America being a relatively safe haven for speech. And the guy who actually stabbed him is, 23 or something. So he probably wasn't even born when the book was written or when that initial outrage happened.
I loved what actually Salman Rushdie had to say about him. I think to a New Yorker piece, if I'm not mistaken, where he said that he's an idiot.
Rushdie once said, he said, you spend 5 years of your life writing a 600-page book. And at the end of it, if somebody's not happy and somebody's not unhappy, somebody's not sad and somebody's not outraged, then what's the point of writing the book?
And ta'an fi deen is blasphemy, and blasphemy is a capital crime in Islam, punishable by death.
And it is a lesson to many other Muslims who should simply think of what they want to say before they say it.
One of the things that a writer can do is to say, here is the way in which you're told you're supposed to look at the world. But actually there are also some other ways.
மாதோருபாகன் அப்படிங்கிற என்னுடைய நாவல்
I finished writing novel Madhurbahan in 2010. Towards the end of 2014, in the beginning of 2015, a dispute regarding it emerged. The setting of the novel is my hometown, Tiruchendur, and the central theme of the novel revolves around a childless couple and the challenges they face in their society. During an ancient festival, childless couples had the opportunity to freely move around and be intimate with their loved one, in the hopes of conceiving children. I based the novel on the legend associated with this specific tradition.
இருந்தது என்ற ஒரு செவிவழி செய்தியை வச்சு நான் அந்த நாவலை உருவாக்கினேன்.
I began studying things related to South Asia at the age of 18. I was an undergraduate. I really had very little idea what I would study, much less what I would do with my life. And I took a class on the Mahabharata, and I fell in love. I thought it was an amazing and highly confusing epic. And so I thought that I should learn more about it to understand and appreciate it better. I took Sanskrit, and things snowballed from there.
My family traditionally are known as Madigas, and our traditional occupation is drumming and sewing sandals. And my ancestors performed those occupations and also had an obligation to do bonded labor to landlords. So in that context, when my grandfather died, so because I was the only male child, so that's how the beginning of my education started, when I started working as bonded laborer, and my mother wanted me to go to school, and that's also the time government of India and Andhra Pradesh government initiated a lot of programs for Dalit children to come to schools.
That's very good. That's a very good dog. It's a beautiful dog. It's a very good dog. All right? My love for India goes back to when I was a young girl learning Sanskrit, and it continues right through 2010, which was the last time I felt comfortable being in India. Over all those years, I made many trips, I made many friends, I learned a lot. I published several books about my time in India, as well as about my study of Sanskrit texts. So it's a country I care about very much. The books I've written have been written out of my love for the country and my love for its culture, particularly for its ancient culture, its stories, its myths, its folk tales, and so forth. So I consider it, in that sense, very much my country, the country of my heart.
In an interview about my first book, which is not about Aurangzeb, I said a couple of things about that particular king that I thought were non-controversial. And I was right as a historian. They're not controversial to historians, but they were apparently complete news and shocking to a wider Indian public. And I saw there an opportunity for communication across a gap.
My name is Leslie Udwin, and I am the director and producer of the documentary film India's Daughter, which was banned in India. Before I went to make this film, I had a complete love affair with India. I must have visited India 30, maybe even 40 times. I used to go virtually every year, and sometimes even more than once a year. When I got there and became involved in making this film, of course my relationship with India changed. Well, it wasn't the darkness, as you'd expect, of the brutal gang rape, that extremely violent, heinous act that took place. It was actually the light of the protests that ensued as a result of that act. I had never in my life seen human beings so utterly impassioned and committed and courageous. I basically fell in love with the protesters. The men and women of India who flooded India's cities and cried no more. We're not having our women treated like this anymore. And I went, I suppose, out of a kind of naivety, because I believed that I was potentially witnessing the end of violence against women.
In a deeply distressing incident, female Indian journalist Gauri Lankesh was brutally assassinated just outside a home in Bangalore. Gauri, who worked for numerous news organizations, fearlessly fought against right-wing Hindutva politics, leading her critics to brand her as a Hindu hater. Over the past few years, journalists critical of Hindu nationalist views have faced relentless criticism, and many female correspondents have been threatened with rape and assault.
She was murdered because she said that what was being done in the name of Hinduism, a religion that she believed that she was part of, did not reflect her beliefs. This is the core of what Hindutva is doing. I see Gauri Lankesh as a victim of what happens when an authoritarian government begins to define what constitutes a true religion, which is partly what happened here.
She was one of the fierce, independent, brave voices in Indian journalism, of which there are very few left, partly because the mainstream media has been completely co-opted into the project of Hindutva, and Gauri stood against all this.
और हिंदुस्तान हिंदू राष्ट्र था, ये हिंदुस्तान हिंदू राष्ट्र है, और हिंदुस्तान हिंदू राष्ट्र.
Hindutva is a political ideology. Hinduism is a religion. And they are often confused because Hindutva uses the language of Hinduism in promoting its politics.
સશક્ત અને અખંડ ભારતના નિર્માણ માટે સક્રિય હિન્દુની ભૂમિકા નિભાવીશ.
हिंदू राष्ट्र घोषित होने वाला है.
कायरो जग जाओ, अब सब हिंदू अपने हाथ में हथियार उठा लो और कह दो हम सब हिंदू एक हैं.
जो भी मेरे हिंदुत्व के प्रति आंख उठा कर देखेगा उसकी गर्दन काट दूंगा.
हिंदू राष्ट्र बहुत बड़ा स्वप्न है, वीर सावरकर का स्वप्न है, शिवाजी का स्वप्न है.
Hindutva is a political ideology that advocates for Hindu supremacy. It is not a religion. And so not only are Hindutva and Hinduism separate, they're not even in the same ontological categories. Political ideology versus religion.
The origins of Hindutva, the RSS, they were inspired by fascism. They were inspired by the fascists in Italy. They were inspired by the Nazis in Nazi Germany. And the idea that a nation belongs to only one kind of people.
Fascism needs a figurehead, somebody who is a larger-than-life personality. In the US, we had Trump just recently, right? You see somebody like Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. And in India, we have Modi. But in history, we had Hitler and we had Mussolini. Hindus feel like they finally have something that belongs to them. But the downside of that is that in order for them to have this thing that belongs to them, a lot of other people have to be either eliminated or relegated to a second-class position.
Hinduism is the way. I'm a hardcore Hindu nationalist. It's awesome what Modi is doing. I support the killing of the Muslims and the Sikhs in the Republic of India because they deserve to die.
Jai Sri Ram.
Jai Sri Ram, what it used to mean is simply a prayer, simply a greeting, simply something positive. Now it's always going to be a call to violence. It's either a call that violence is going to happen or a violence has happened and likely has happened against Muslims. Anything that doesn't fit the vision is ultimately not just free speech or different speech anymore. It's something that is seen as a threat. And it's not just a threat to Hindutva, because Hindutva is being equated with India. So then you become not just anti-Hindutva, anti-Hindu, you become what? An anti-national.
We were nationalists, we are nationalists, and we will remain nationalists.
These people had the idea that India should be a nation that is exclusively for the Hindus. And Muslims have no part in this, Christians have no part in this. And then it gets more complicated because, what is a Hindu? Are all Hindus the same all over the Indian subcontinent? They're not necessarily. They don't necessarily have the same diets or the same practices.
Whole idea of imagination of nation is that, people living in a territory are supposed to be equals. But the reality of Hinduism is that, it imagines unequals.
But it's basically a monolithic, homogeneous vision of India as a nation.
India believes in freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So this is a threat to Hindutva because Hindutva is invested in a Hindu-centric India. Secularism is not that. Secularism gives rights to Muslims, to Christians, to Sikhs, to Jains, to everybody else. So what we see today in India is an attempt to undermine that kind of equality and equity in treatment.
In a so-called incipient, in the making Hindu Rashtra of the kind that this government thinks is the ultimate utopia, and the dream that they seem to be working towards, is the nightmare that many people are working to subvert with their art, with their writing, with their song, with their dance, with their books. And they'll continue to do so. There's not much they can do about that.
Anyone who's upset, he can decide what you can or cannot say. For example, Faruqi, they disallow his acts even before they know what he's going to say. The first time when he was arrested, he had made the joke yet. They said, but he's going to.
Who doesn't have freedom of speech? I'm not going to tell you. I'll just give you a hint. Right now, there is a comedian in prison for over a month for jokes he didn't do that evening. Comedians have to write affidavits to the Supreme Court to explain their tweets. I got 17 legal notices last year. I went to court twice. Why? So why are comedians, writers, journalists, poets, artists going to jail? It's because they're afraid. Afraid of who? Afraid of us? Fuck no. They can squash us in a second. Watch. They will soon. They're afraid of you. The scariest sound that this establishment can hear is not the wording of my jokes, it's the energy in your laughs.
It is the duty of the comedian to find out where the line is drawn and cross it deliberately. And I think there will be casualties, which is why I have a huge amount of respect for brave stand-up comics. I have a huge amount of respect for Kunal Kamra. I have a huge amount of respect for people, for Aisi Taisi Democracy, Sanjay Rajora.
So my name is Sanjay Rajora and I'm 51 years old. Comedy happened by chance. Stand-up comic का काम रुलाना भी है, लोगों को शॉक करना भी है, लोगों को परेशान करना भी है.
Yeah, I'm Dalit and I identify myself as Brahmin. My pronouns are Dakshina Kam hai.
Somehow I talk about only my lifestyle or my life stories, my anecdotes about my life, and it automatically become political. But I never talk about politics. But still it becomes political, you know. So that is something interesting.
Upper caste people who will come to you and say, I don't believe in caste. I don't even remember my own caste. I don't even know my own caste. But my answer to them is, you don't know your own caste because you are an upper caste. If you were a Dalit, you would have known your caste on day one. The world would have reminded you.
और मैं 3 हफ्ते मेरा दिमाग खराब, ये कहना क्या चाह रहा है कि Vedas are superior to is equal to MC square? And then I realized that for an upper caste Hindu, everything is about superiority of Vedas. साइंस की ऑनर किलिंग कर रहे, सीरियसली. हमारा प्राइम मिनिस्टर बोलता है यार कि दुनिया की पहली प्लास्टिक सर्जरी इंडिया में हुई है. पता है किसकी? गणेश की.
So my God, did he actually say that about Modi? They are doing the jobs for our minds. What soldiers are doing for our national security at the borders.
Talking is the only way out. We can't be a country or person who are scared to talk. And we are like that right now.
The reason why people don't talk about religion, even well-intentioned people, good-intentioned people, is because religion is not self-critical. It never examines itself. It does not allow you to examine itself or question it.
If Dalit people go to jail, they don't get bail. Just all the maximum, almost more than 70% of the under trial prisoners are Dalit people, and they don't get dates also. So I can't be that person. If I go there, then I can't do comedy only.
The worst times are the best times for satire. If everything is hunky-dory, who would need a satirist?
It's like what Brecht said, no? Will there be singing and dancing in the dark times? He says, yes, there will be singing and dancing, especially in the dark times.
Hindutva ideologues have some very bizarre and wrong-headed ideas about Aurangzeb. They're false, they're based on mythology, some of them are misinterpretations of the past, some of them are pure fabrication. And I came along in a book aimed at a public audience in India, and I said all of that in no uncertain terms. And that was deeply upsetting to them. It's not just that I contradicted their ideology and what they believed, it's that I did so with the backing of scholarly authority. That was upsetting.
In what can be considered as yet another assault on the freedom of expression, Tamil writer Perumal Murugan has been forced to withdraw his book and tender an unconditional apology after his book came under attack from fringe groups.
அந்த நாவல் கடவுளை இழிவுபடுத்துகிறது.
The allegations that the novel ridicules God, women and the village first emerged in December of 2014. Various spiritual, religious and caste organizations in Tiruchengodu collaborated to amplify the issue. Their primary demands were for me to issue an apology and for the publication of my book to be halted. They also insisted on my arrest and the termination of my government employment.
அப்படிங்கிற கோரிக்கையெல்லாம் வந்து அதில் இருந்தது.
I write on Dalit intellectual history, particularly the way in which Dalits have imagined a different nation compared to the privileged caste Hindus. Where, one of the important arguments I try to make in my book is that, like privileged caste Hindus, Dalits also are equal participants in the imagination and making of nation in India. But their imagination is different compared to privileged caste Hindus, because they said equality and dignity as a precondition for the making of the nation. And I try to bring in the idea of Dalit, idea of nation, as a unique perspective which contested both privileged caste Hindus and Brahmanical imagination, and try to premise nation on the foundations of equality and dignity. And democracy as a very central aspect in this.
There was one man named Batra. He and a group of his colleagues brought a lawsuit against the book under a law in India that was actually devised, ironically, by the British in the early 20th century. There was a law that made it a criminal offense to offend the religious sensibilities of someone in India. And anything can offend anyone. You don't have to be intentionally offensive.
When you talk about offense to religious sentiments, all you need is one. Right? And in a nation of more than 1.3 billion people, somebody is offended by everything.
It is so vaguely termed. It is not that a specific act of burning a book or a specific act of defacing an idol, that we will consider as, an offense to religion. It is anything that you may say, do, feel, indicate.
So, just the way laws are written is actually irrelevant. So the more vague they keep it, the more broad their interpretation and they can arrest anyone.
The Indian justice system is slow, shall we say. And so you don't need to win a case in India, you just need to bring it and keep it alive for years, to bleed people dry and make people's lives a living hell.
The mobilization happens because you want to put people under pressure and you want to give a sort of a signal that, look, we have you and we can have you. So if we want to screw with your happiness, if we want to put you behind bars, or if we want to, embroil you in a long drawn court case, we can do it.
हम इस बात के विरोधी थे और हम उसमें सफल हुए हैं कि किसी भी एक गंदी किताब का व्यापारीकरण हो और किसी दुकान पर वो बिके और उससे उसको लाभ हो, ये ना हो, उस कारण से ये किताब उस दुकान से तो विड्रॉ हो गई.
This man, Batra, and his colleagues said that they were offended by my book. And that was enough to frighten my publisher, Penguin, into withdrawing the book from sale in India.
It's been a shameful week in many ways. Monday saw a huge debate on free speech in India following the decision of a big publishing house to withdraw a leading academic's book on an alternative take on Hinduism. On Tuesday, India was given a shameful rank of 140 on the map of press freedom.
I don't think Penguin should have caved in. I'm very, very clear about this. Penguin is, I understand the pressure it faces, but Penguin is part of a massive global corporation, Penguin Random House. They have resources. If you are publishing books, you cannot cave into the first fascist who files a lawsuit against you. So I don't think they should have caved in. I don't think the book should have been pulped. It's actually a very good book.
So it was, in my view, a very pro-Indian book, a pro-Hindu book. It was showing how generous and broad Hinduism had been, how it had allowed all sorts of ideas always. Different ideas about what the gods were like, different ideas about how humans should behave, different ideas about how you should treat people of low caste, how you should treat women. That it was an enormously liberal tradition, very tradition. It wasn't just one thing, it was so many things. So I felt that this was a book in praise of Hinduism. And therefore I was surprised, shall we say, to see that some people in India found it offensive.
She's a Westerner, she's a woman, and she's an actual scholar who knows a lot about the Indian history. And again, this is something that provokes them. These people are ignorant. They want you to believe, that there were flying cars in ancient India.
If Wendy Doninger is talking about the various versions of Ramayana, and you're trying to ban that book, kisko ban karoge? There are 500 versions of Ramayana, of Valmiki's Ramayana. In some, Ram is a villain. In some, Sita is attracted to Ravan. In others, Ravan is a sacrosanct divine figure. What will you do? Audrey Truschke is guilty of the same crime. Why did you write anything that suggested that Aurangzeb was anything but horrific, but a monster?
I don't feel anything about Aurangzeb. He's been dead over 300 years. He's a king at a time that is long, long gone. And I'm interested in him as a historian, but I don't like him or dislike him. I do not love him, nor do I hate him. That whole set of questions is not helpful for me. And so when I wrote the Aurangzeb book, I didn't judge him, because how does judging the past by the standards of the present help us understand it? It doesn't.
I constantly write about inequality and discrimination as the foundation of Hinduism and Hindutva ideology. So therefore what happens is that, they try to attack people who write, and therefore in 19th century America, educated slave is the biggest threat to the slavery. In India, educated Dalit is the biggest threat to the Hindutva.
My access to the past and the way in which I make authority claims about the past, that's based on training. I read Sanskrit, I read Persian, I read some Hindi and Urdu and Braj Bhasha, even occasionally English. And I use all of that to try to accurately reconstruct and make evidence-based arguments about the past. My advice to Hindutva folks who want none of that, who simply want one's ability to talk about the past to be based on the color of one's skin or the passport that one carries, my advice is to stop listening to scholars.
The film was due to be screened on the Sunday night, the 8th of March, International Women's Day. And a young journalist came running up to me with her phone and said, ma'am, you have to leave the country. I've just had a message from my editor. Find Leslie Udwin, tell her the film has just been banned and an FIR has been put out. She should go. And I said, no, I'm not accepting this. I had 7 lawyers. I get through to a lawyer. I say to him, look, everyone I'm speaking to is saying, pack your bags, go to Delhi airport right now, get out the country. He said, no, under no circumstances do that. I thought, oh, thank heavens. He said, you drive to Nepal and take a plane out of there because they'll be waiting for you at Delhi airport.
And what was the documentary filmmaker trying to do? Trying to get into the psychosis of this person. What motivates you? Any intelligent agency would welcome that. It is food for thought for psychologists, for sociologists, for criminologists, for the police, for every state enforcement agency. How does the criminal mind operate? What are the constituents of a perverted, criminal, debauched mind like that? Instead of that, you orchestrate rage. You're outraged. You say, oh my God, this is offensive. I won't talk to you. That's not the answer.
The process of going through the interviews with the rapists.
हर कोई शरीफ लड़की होती है रात को 9 बजे मतलब नहीं घूमती है.
And I have to say the interviews with their lawyers.
We have the best culture. In our culture, there is no place for a woman. With a boy who was neither her husband nor her brother.
Was deeply, profoundly distressing and depressing. It led me at one point to have, I suppose, a sort of minor breakdown. I woke up completely wet with sweat one morning in the very early hours of the morning, shivering, shaking, phoning home to beg my family to book me on a plane and get me out of there because I couldn't take anymore. And, there were just vile, awful parts to this, but nothing was as vile as recognizing at the very end of the process, having delivered the film, and then finding it was banned. Nothing depressed me as much as that.
Yeah, there was absolutely a connection between the revocation of my OCI and the Time magazine article. The Prime Minister, who knew very well that I'd grown up in India with an Indian mother, was completely implicated in Indian intellectual life, comes forward and says, this guy is a Pakistani.
Atish has lived here since he was a child. Everybody knew that. And then suddenly he writes this article in Time magazine, which they put on the cover, and they called it Divider in Chief, a headline, as you probably know, that the journalist doesn't give, but that the editor does. And it was really mostly the headline and the picture of the caricature of Modi that they objected to.
I'm not even sure if people read that piece. What irked the government or the powers that be was the headline. And that is not the mark of a very confident nation.
In India, a government decision to ban a BBC documentary on Prime Minister Narendra Modi has triggered a fierce debate on free speech. The use of emergency laws to suppress it faces strong opposition from advocates of free speech, students and civil liberties champions. Diverse groups across India organised documentary screenings in peaceful protest, asserting their right to free speech. But state authorities used force to disrupt the screenings.
मोदी जी की जो नई डॉक्यूमेंट्री आई है उसकी स्क्रीनिंग होने वाली है जो बीबीसी ने बनाई है रिसेंटली। सो प्रॉक्टर ने ऑर्डर किया है कि सारे गेट्स को बंद कर दो, जो भी बच्चे किसी को आने मत दो, सारी कैंटीन्स क्लोज्ड है, हम लोग अंदर फंसे हुए थे, खाने के लिए कुछ नहीं है।
This has created a situation where students not only face power and internet cuts, but also arrests and excessive force to prevent them from watching the banned documentary. The Modi Question is a two-part documentary series examining his role in the 2002 Gujarat riots, which took place during his tenure as the Chief Minister of Gujarat. The series discusses documents uncovered by the BBC, including a UK government report that he was directly responsible for the climate of impunity.
The effort of any fascist regime or state is to bonsai the brain, is to bonsai the creative impulse, because that is what they fear the most. Because when people react viscerally to something is what you most fear.
The government of India has criticised it as hostile propaganda and anti-India garbage, while the BBC affirms that the documentary underwent rigorous research.
We are not an authoritarian country, we are not a despotic country, we are not a dictatorship, we are a democracy. We are on the boat of democracy. When you ban the BBC documentary, you're jumping off that democratic ship and you're jumping onto another ship which we don't want to be a part of.
Soon after that, you had the tax surveys on BBC.
Indian tax authorities conducted what they referred to as surveys at BBC offices in Delhi and Mumbai, just weeks after the British broadcaster aired a documentary critical of Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
The moment Atish writes a piece in the Time, you have action on OCI, weeks after BBC does a documentary, you have tax surveys. So it's very clear what's happening.
The Time magazine article appeared in May. That week, the Prime Minister sort of says, but this is a Pakistani who's written this. That set the trolls completely against me. All the sort of news organizations that were allied with the BJP started to attack me. By August, I'd received a letter threatening to take away my OCI. My OCI was cancelled by the Home Ministry on Twitter.
He'd left India maybe 2 weeks before that, suddenly discovered that he couldn't come back here. Why would he not be given an ordinary tourist visa to come and see his grandmother, who is 93?
And I have brought Atish up as an Indian, which he is. And I would like him, I miss him very much. And I would like him to come home.
Writers like Atish, the seed we should be celebrating as a country. One of his books, at least, is my favorite, The Way Things Were. It's a fiction book. It's rooted in India. A lot of his work is rooted in India. And we really should be celebrating these writers, wanting them to be in the country, write more, engage with them, get our youngsters to interact with people like that. And instead you have this petty reaction of banishing someone because you essentially didn't like a headline in a piece.
One day, when I can afford it, I should sue this man because he called him a trained ISI agent, which is not just a lie, but it is such a salacious, horrible lie. Because if he's a trained ISI agent, what does that make me?
So I have received hate mail from the Hindu right wing, broadly conceived, since late 2015. It's not consistent, it's not always every single day, but it's definitely every week. And at times, it's every 5 minutes. The hate mail has a couple of different genres. By far, the most recurrent common thread is sheer misogyny. All right, so calling me a bitch, a slut, a whore, imagining me as a member of Aurangzeb's harem, which I find bizarre on many, many levels, trying to degrade me as a woman. Many people cannot handle a woman talking and feel the need to scream over her. So I have had Hindu right-wingers show up at talks in North America, as well as in India. They tend to be a bit more aggressive in India, but I do have armed security with some frequency when I speak publicly now.
She exposes their ignorance, and she does it as a scholar, she does it as a Westerner, she does it as a woman, and that's why they react to it as the only way they know. It's hatred.
Bullets pumped into your body for speaking your mind. Yes, Gauri Lankesh was a journalist and an activist with strong political views. But is murder the new norm for dealing with anyone with strong views? For dealing with anyone you disagree with? And is the new norm to celebrate murder?
Before Gauri was assassinated, the scholar M.M. Kalburgi was killed. And before that, Govind Pansari, who was a trade unionist in Maharashtra, he was killed. And before that, Narendra Dabholkar, who was a doctor, a left-wing activist, he was killed. And all four, including Gauri, were critics of Hindutva.
It's threatened by free speech. People who want to express that one Hinduism doesn't look like another, right? That is what gets Gauri Lankesh murdered.
There was a kind of a project to eliminate dissenting voices. Some of this is done through outright killing and assassination, as was the case with Gauri and the three other activists we are talking about. Some of this is done in other ways, through lawsuits, through intimidation, through, forcing the books to be withdrawn from, publication, from forcing them out of syllabi in colleges and universities. So there is a whole range of, strategies to silence people. Assassination is one end of that project of silencing that is going on.
Writer whose work reflects the deep association that he has with India, with his people, with his language, and you want to penalize him for that. It's nightmare for any artist aspiring to do anything. Stories like this, and it's extremely tragic what happened with him.
அப்போ கடும் எதிர்ப்பை உருவாக்குவதற்காக
They printed specific passages from the book and distributed them to the villagers. Wherever people gathered, such as temples, they distributed those printouts. They included my phone number on all those printouts. And there was someone present to encourage people to call me and use foul language once they read it.
அதனால் அந்த நோட்டீஸை படிக்கக்கூடியவர்கள்லாம் எனக்கு ஃபோன் பண்ணி இந்த மாதிரி
I had to turn off my phone due to endless calls. I was advised to leave my hometown with my family by the officers of Namakkal police station. So I was compelled and had to depart from my homeland.
அங்கே திருச்செங்கோடு முழுக்க கடையடைப்பு போராட்டம் நடத்துவோம் அப்படின்னு அறிவிச்சாங்க.
A society is as vital as it thinks, as it argues, as it examines, as it wrestles with questions and comes up with ever new evolving answers. There should be intellectual ferment. And if you discourage that, then ultimately a society will wither and die. We die as a people, we die in our souls first.
La 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 கொடியருவே கொட்டுதே அடியன் மேல la 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 la.
In January 2015, well-known Tamil writer Perumal Murugan famously announced his own literary obituary, writing, "Perumal Murugan, the writer, is dead."
வை நடுக காட்டு மல்லி யாரும் அத பார்க்கலையே.
It was really very hard time for us. I was very scared and very anxious during that time. I spent my whole study leave with police protection in our house. So that time my dad, he announced the writer in him was dead.
பல ஜென்மம் தாண்டி வந்த உறவே கனமுடி கண்ட
Author Perumal Murugan has died. He is no God, so he is not going to resurrect himself, nor does he believe in reincarnation. He withdraws all the novels, short stories, essays and poetry he has written so far. All those who have brought his books so far are free to burn them. If anyone feels they have incurred a waste or loss in buying his books, he will offer them a compensation. He requests caste, religious political and other groups not to engage in protest or create problems. Please leave him alone.
La 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 Kodiyarve kutte ariyen mela Ada tedi arve kutte una unnala.
Artists around the world have faced free speech suppression extending beyond India. And throughout history, art has grappled with persistent obstacles.
Galileo Galilei, an Italian astronomer, faced censure from the Catholic Church for advocating heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. He was summoned and found guilty of blasphemy, spending the rest of his life under house arrest. In Nazi Germany, writers and artists faced imprisonment, exile, and torture. Hitler burned books to eradicate what he deemed as un-German. And as recently as 2022, a pastor in the US led a book burning to combat demonic influences.
It seems to me completely legitimate that there should be dissent from orthodoxy, not just about Islam, but about anything.
Within hours of the fatwa, 6 lives were tragically lost, and 37 people were killed in Turkey in the Sivas massacre. The first all-girl rock band of Kashmir had to disband after a fatwa was issued by a Muslim cleric. Journalist Arthur Koestler faced arrest, and Federico Garcia Lorca, a Spanish poet, was assassinated by the fascist regime. Though those fascists are long gone, Lorca's legacy lives on.
We regret that the laureate is not present. He is in isolation in a prison in northeast China.
Nobel Prize laureate and literary critic Liu Xiaobo was arrested for composing 7 sentences that called for human rights in China. He passed away in custody. In Czechoslovakia, many intellectuals, writers, and artists were persecuted, harassed, and arrested for writing and signing Charter 77, a declaration that called for the respect of human rights. Oleg Sentsov, a Ukrainian filmmaker and political activist, was sentenced to jail for speaking out. Nigerian writer and activist Saro Wiwa had his wrists and ankles shackled. He was later executed. Canadian filmmaker Deepa Mehta faced challenges during the production of her Elements trilogy. Cinemas were vandalized upon the release of her film, and she even received death threats from religious fundamentalists. Asim Trivedi was arrested for creating cartoons.
वो भी मैं करप्शन के खिलाफ बना रहा हूँ, तो मुझे लगा इसमें देशद्रोह जैसा क्या है?
In Paris, gunmen targeted the offices of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Killing and injuring many due to the magazine's satirical cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. And in India, M.F. Hussein's depictions of Hindu goddesses sparked outrage and dismay among fundamentalists.
हमारे देवी देवताओं की नंगी तस्वीर वो कौन सा हुसैन बनाता था? M.F. Hussain?
Forcing the artists into a self-imposed exile, far from the land that once celebrated his creativity.
I did not stop my writing. I continue my fight against fundamentalists.
Taslima Nasreen, with fearless writings on women's rights and criticism of religious fundamentalism, has led to her exile from her home Bangladesh. Myanmar reporters Walon and Kya Sau were arrested for seeking the truth. In the United States, the president labeled journalists as the enemy of the American people. In Turkey, President Erdogan regularly vilifies journalists as foreign spies, arresting and detaining them without charges. In China, under Xi Jinping's leadership, the government censors work that does not promote party ideology.
A writer's life and work are not a gift to mankind. A writer's life and work are its necessity.
Many other authoritarian regimes also ban art, films, books, and imprison individuals holding dissenting voices.
Despite the stories of suppression and countless more, the spirit of art has always endured its unstoppable nature. Whether through films, words, music, or brushstrokes, art lives on. It always has, and it always will. My name is Sunil Kalia.
You don't need protections for freedom of speech that nobody objects to. The whole reason why you need to protect speech is because somebody wants to clamp down on it.
Why should a third party impose on me what I should watch or not? I'm a full-grown adult. I'm a thinking person. I have views.
We need to think of this as society. I mean, how much is too much?
Freedom of speech is an evolved right, is an evolved thing. And it has to be constantly negotiated by the society and the citizenry to keep on pushing the envelope.
Absolute freedom of speech is like that. It's like objectivity. A very valuable, diamond of a virtue that you must keep striving towards, but you will never be able to realize.
But yes, in an ideal world, utopia, yes, freedom of speech should be absolute.